Good evening, and welcome to True Fact History, where tonight you will be learning about the Vietnam War and more specifically, the draft. To give you some background, the Vietnam War took place from 1955 to 1975 and proved to be one of the most controversial wars. When America decided to fully support South Vietnam and send troops, they actually had trouble rounding up volunteer soldiers. For this reason, in 1964, President Johnson invoked the peacetime draft. Men from ages 18 to 25 were required to register for the draft and wait to see if their number was called during a lottery. If their numbers were called, the ideal situation is that the man would report to the draft office and then train to fight in Vietnam. This ideal situation did not always occur, though. Many men refused to fight in a war that they did not believe in, so they would either start a family, register for college, or run away so that they could dodge the draft. So since you were 12, you weren't directly affected by the draft, but did you know anybody who was?
I was too young to be directly involved in the draft myself, but I did have two older brothers who were directly involved, and my dad was as well.
So you said two of your older brothers were involved in the draft. Can you tell me a little bit about their experiences?
Well, on two separate occasions, they would have a lottery for the draft to see who was going to get called up, and so my two brothers had to go through that lottery. And it was, as you might imagine, a very, very anxious, intense time for the family.
So you mentioned that your father was also involved. Can you expand a little bit upon how he was?
He participated as a civilian, as a member of the draft board, and as such, he had to basically sign draft cards that sent the boys who were drafted into service.
So tell me, why did your father believe in serving on the draft board?
Well, Dad is very patriotic. Dad was a World War II veteran. Dad's father, while he wasn't American, he was Scottish, served in the Highland Light Infantry, and his grandfather served in North Africa. And so Dad was a very big believer in patriotism and in serving your country.
So touching back upon the fact that your father was on the draft board, did his views stay the same throughout the entire war?
Actually, it didn't. Dad was in favor, as I mentioned before, at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the draft. But as time went on and it became obvious to him that we were not winning this war, that we were not fighting it to win it, and he no longer believed in what we were doing over there, he realized he couldn't send boys over to Vietnam to be wounded, to be killed, and he resigned from the draft board. And that actually reminds me of a story. We had a very good friend who was drafted, who did go to Vietnam. He served his time there, and he came back. And after he was discharged, he was over our house one night, he was sitting there with my brothers and myself. My dad was there, and he went into his wallet, he took out his draft card, and he put it down in front of my father. It had his name on it, had his signature on it, and he looked up at my dad and said, "Thanks a lot." You know? Well, he went on to have a very difficult time readjusting, and he ultimately didn't survive the war because he came down with cancer, and ultimately he died from that cancer that they believed to be due to Agent Orange that he was exposed to while he was in Vietnam.
So to finish this off, can you tell me a little bit about how the public reacted to the draft and how they reacted when the draft was over?
Sentiment in the country became very, very significantly anti-Vietnam War. Obviously, the attitude toward the draft was very negative, and it was obviously a great relief and a great positive reaction by the public in general to there no longer being a draft, and us taking steps to get out of that conflict and to bring our people home from Vietnam.
Throughout the Vietnam War, the country was very divided on whether or not we should fight. In the interview with Brian, we learned that the draft did not only affect the eligible men, but their families around them. It was clear to almost everyone that the United States was not necessarily in Vietnam to fight to win, and this changed many people's views, including Brian's dad. There was a common trend that the veteran father believed his son should fight for his country, but after time went by, they began to realize that this was not our war to fight. For the men that were drafted, that moment did not only change their present lives, but how they would live in the future as well. Brian's family friend paid the ultimate price because of the Vietnam War even after it ended. It is important to recognize that this was one person's views on the Vietnam War, and there were many different views throughout the U.S. which made the large split.